dual plants from like their gardens, and then I would come back and give it back to my grandma so she can plant it in our own backyard. But yeah.
Thank you for sharing, Vivian. Let's go to Hermilio.
Well, yes, hello. What can I say about me? Let me tell you, my parents used to be farmers. And even today, I have in my house, I have lots of citrus trees that is growing at the backyard. And when the time is right, which is early, no, I think during the spring, before summer, which is July and August, you can just go at the backyard, and if you want to enjoy a delicious bananas or apples or oranges, you can just go and pick them. You don't have to go to the store. So I think I'm very lucky that I still have that today. And what I remember when I was a little kid is to go and pick peaches with either with my father or mother. So I have the choice today that I could do that, and I really like it.
Thank you for sharing that, Hermilio. Let's go to Giselle.
The foraging I've done so far is when I was little, I went to Mexico for the first time, and my grandparents would take me out and we just walk around and look at the crops. So we'd pick corn, apples, and I think they're called elderberries in English. I'm not quite sure, but it was just walking around Mexico and picking at the plants and just enjoying it after with my family and stuff like that.
Thank you for sharing that, Giselle. Ulysses?
Yeah, so in my neighborhood, a lot of people have like guava trees or also citrus trees in their front yards as well as their backyards. So if I'm ever walking with my mom or family to some place and there's like a really fresh looking fruit or something like that, we would pick it. We also have we also have like a garden in our backyard, and that's where we grow cactus that we usually eat. So that's one of my memories.
Nice. Thanks for sharing that, Ulysses. Let's go to Daniel Lopez. And I think you're the only one on the call today.
I guess my earliest memory would be when I was in elementary school and I would walk it and I would pass by these orange trees. And I remember I would see people, they would park their cars and then get on the cars to start picking them. I was pretty small, so I never really foraged those trees, but I remember seeing the oranges always on the floor, but they are usually already rotten or ripped open.
It sounds like that was a popular orange tree. It looks like the other Daniel just got on the call. Daniel, we're talking about a memory of foraging from our childhood, right? So you may have like walked through your community and there was like a blackberry bush or an orange tree or a lemon tree, right? We're talking about memories from our childhood of foraging in our communities. Do you have a memory that you would like to share, Daniel?
Let me see. I think I need a sec to think about this one.
No problem, no problem. Steven, let's go to you. I see that you came off of mute, Steven, but I cannot hear you. I'm not sure if I'm the only one.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, I was saying, when I was a kid, in LA, my mom had at the house there, she had a guayaba tree. And I remember going back there and eating them. just be out there and playing and eating graham in the backyard.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that, Steven. Let's go to Ethan.
Yeah, my memories from elementary school, walking to school in the mornings. There was a trail behind my house that went there, and there were always blackberry bushes. So me and my brothers would pick those sometimes and eat them on the way back from school.
I just want to say that I'm glad I'm not the only one that was foraging and eating berries off of bushes growing up. So this is bringing joy to me real quick. Linda, let's go to you.
So I grew up in Orange County, so a lot of my neighbors would have extra fruit because the fruit trees would usually give off way more than for just one family to consume. So usually we would go and they would let us pick like extra lemons, oranges, or pomegranates. And yeah, it was, I really loved how much fruit they have down there and how lots of families just like exchange fruit with each other and like help each other out.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that, Linda. Let's go to you, Ricardo.
Hi. Well, the only memory I have is we used to have a lime tree at our house, but with the heat it kind of dried up. But that's pretty much all the foraging I've done, just picked from that lime tree.
Nice, nice. Catherine?
I don't have too many experiences at my house of foraging, but I remember when I used to go visit my grandma, she would give us, or we would go and pick and eat my favorite fruit, pomelos. So that was an experience, but it also just always reminded me of visiting her.
Well, just a quick question, Catherine. Because a few of you mentioned not foraging near home, but going, let's say, to a family member's house and foraging there. I'm gonna ask you, Catherine, was there a difference between the landscape at home versus at your grandmother's house?
For some reason, I feel like at my grandparents' house, my parents would let me go out and explore their garden. But then when it came to our house, we didn't have much fruit in our backyard, even when I went out. But I think that my parents didn't really let me explore the neighborhood as much. So I wasn't able to find that for myself. But going to my grandparents' house, it was still like more or less as a kid, like a new environment and experience. So yeah, I feel like that was.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing, Catherine. Let's go to you, Joshua.
Yeah, same here. I mostly had memories with a town where my grandparents live. Because my home, it was just more like economic and more commercial. But like where my grandma lives, I mean, the whole area used to be a farmland too. So there's still like private horse ranches and like a lot of fruit gardens. And my grandma, she used to have like orange and lemon trees in her backyard. On I think it was guava too. Well, I mean, but it was just those two citrus fruits, and they would have like no, they'll have like too many that sometimes she'll share some of her fruits with some of the neighbors. She'll just give them away, and I think one time too, and sometimes we just pick some lemons out from her backyard and just kind of just put them in our waters and stuff. It's yeah, just kind of put in my water whenever it gets hot. Just kind of enjoy like lemon water or like lime water. So.
A very refreshing option, right? Especially on a hot day. Get some cold water, puts a little bit of fruit in it. You got a nice flavored drink. Let's go to Jocelyn.
Hello. So the former house I used to live in was owned by my family for generations. So my great grandma planted a lemon tree there, and by the time I was in elementary school, it was very big. And I just remember my brother and I always picking the lemons and having people who like our neighbors and the community come over and pick lemons with us, and then they would take it home, and they'd always be there because the lemon tree just provided a lot of lemons. That's what I remember.
Nice. Thank you, Jocelyn. Let's go to Chris.
So I grew up in Arizona, and my house specifically didn't have any trees or fruit plants or anything like that. But my neighbors and a few of my friends had like lemon trees and orange trees and stuff like that. We used to pick and make juices and lemonade. And then my grandparents also lived somewhere else. They lived in Sacramento, so they had much more options there. And they lived and owned a couple acres up in the Sacramento Hills. So I actually baked a few different types of pies from my grandma's garden. And yeah.
Nice. So Sacramento was a little more greener than Arizona, huh?
Definitely a lot greener.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. Let's go to Paige.
Yeah, when I was growing up, we lived in an apartment, and my grandma actually was in Orange County. So I remember going to her house a lot and like picking oranges from her tree and making orange juice and all that stuff. It was really fun and really nice to be able to spend that time.
Nice. Thank you, Paige. And Edgar?
Yeah. So when I was a kid, I grew up in Mexicali, and it was just right across the border from the Imperial Valley, it's a big city in Mexico. Then I didn't really have any foraging experiences because my parents didn't really let us out of the house. It was just not really, it wasn't really that kind of neighborhood. It was really just a big city, dirt streets, and all the houses are fenced in. So I didn't really have that experience. But then we moved to the States when I was like 9 years old, and it was a developing neighborhood. And really the only like memory of the foraging was when I met these kids in my neighborhood. We'd go ride our bikes, and there was this house at the very end of the cul-de-sac, and he had a row of like pomelo and grapefruits and citrus trees. And we didn't really pick them to eat them, but more so to like throw them at each other and just kind of like do that whole thing, And and my neighbor also had a lemon tree, so when my mom needed some citrus to make some kind of salad tacos, she'd be like, "Hey, like go like lean over the fence and like grab a couple for me." So
Multi-purpose, huh? They were weapons sometimes, huh?
Yeah, they were ammunition for kids. But yeah,
Awesome.
that's
Thanks for sharing that, Edgar.
For sure.
Let's go to Juan.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. I heard you, and then you went back on mute.
So for my
It may be some audio issues. I'm not sure if everyone else can hear, but I heard you for a second, but then it went out. If you want one, go ahead and type your response in the chat, and I can read it out loud for you. And while we're waiting for that, let's go.
Yeah, could you hear me now?
It says Ricardo.
Yeah, because I'm with Ricardo at on campus, and my phone is lagging. Yeah.
All right, because I'm like,
No, yeah, but it's me though.
Great. All right, awesome.
So my foraging experience was picking grapes that weren't ripe in my front yard, and I just remember my mom getting upset that I was picking the grapes when it wasn't time for harvest. So not a good experience, but that's one that I could remember.
Did you ever learn, Juan, when to wait for the harvest? Or was it like, forget these grapes for here and evermore? I'm not picking grapes ever.
No, it was more like they were just like discolored.
Okay.
So it was like not time for them. But after that, I just kind of stayed away from them,
Yeah, it was a little traumatizing. Like, okay,
Yeah.
we won't deal with the grapes at all. No,
Yeah, it
no,
wasn't
thank
the
you for
vibe
sharing
anymore.
that. Daniel, let's go
Thank
back
you.
to you.
Yeah, so I have a memory. I remember my family used to always go camping in the summers. And so we would go to Sequoia National Park. And I remember that I would go scavenging for the pine cones, and I would kind of go collecting them. And then I would see like berries along the bushes and stuff, but I was too scared to touch them just in case. Like I was like poisonous or whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. You were scared you might get one of those poison berries, huh?
Yep.
Yeah. Jesus, did you have a chance to share yet?
No, not yet. Sorry if it's a bit loud here. I'm in the studio. But some of the foraging memories that I have is I grew up with my grandmother in Guatemala, and Guatemala is a lot of like fruits and it's just really just spot out in the morning because it's kind of like a rainforest. And it rains a lot of it anyway. So I remember climbing trees and to get mangoes. I would get mangoes. There was this other fruit that we called palmito. I don't know what it's called in English. Also almonds. Um, there was another fruit that was kind of like long and like white. It had like multiple seeds inside. I forgot what it's called too, but just like climbing trees, was a big thing in my childhood. I did attend Spanish school too for a couple of years, so even just again, all the kids out there just really just climb trees all the time. So that's and I kid you not, I would climb trees that were like I would probably be up like 30 feet and not be scared,
Wow.
But it was
Are
always
you
fun.
still able to do that, Jesus? Are you still going
No,
30?
no, you know,
You know,
I have a funny story about that because there was a tree that I climbed once and there was a big rock below it, right? And I fell off the tree onto that rock and I broke my arm, my hand, actually my wrist. But still, I never learned my lesson. I was kept climbing trees even after I had a cast. So
I wonder what happens, from the time that we were a kid and fearless, think we can do anything. We'll play with any insect. We'll do any
Yeah.
challenge, right?
Yeah.
And then I don't know when it turns on, but then it's like, yeah, not gonna do that.
No.
Not messing
Yeah.
with grasshoppers or
Yeah.
praying mantises or spiders, right? Like
Yeah.
kids will do anything. But yeah, thanks for sharing that. Yeah, no, that was did anyone else need to share? I think there may Jenna, I think you just hopped on. We're sharing foraging memories, right? You may be the last person to share. Hopefully someone can jump in and save you who hasn't shared already, but you might be the last person. Stephen, did you get a chance to share yet?
Hello? Sorry, I did leave for a bit. I'm back. I
Okay,
went to
great.
use the restroom, yeah.
No problem. Did you get a chance to share your foraging memory?
Yeah, it was
Okay.
about my mom and she had a guayaba tree in our backyard.
All right, okay.
Mhm.
Cool. Jenna, so we're sharing childhood memories of foraging. So walking through your community or maybe when you went to go visit a family member, picking fruit, right? What that experience was like, who you did it with.
Okay, yeah. My mom is like a super huge gardener. We've never not had a massive garden. We have like zucchinis, pumpkins, tomatoes, like literally every vegetable that you can imagine. My mom found a space somewhere to grow it. So, I mean, even now I still eat all the strawberries that she grows. But as a kid, we had this one of my houses I lived in at one point had like a really big backyard. And she always used to make these cucumber salads for me that I still eat. I had one today at
Worst
lunch,
feeling
but
ever.
it's cucumbers with like, oh, I'm so sorry, my cat is losing her mind. It's cucumbers with tomatoes and basil. And so she would ask me if I wanted that for like school lunch. So I'd go out and pick the cucumbers and the tomatoes, and she'd wash them for me and then cut them up and make a little salad with some goat cheese. And I still eat that like every day. So
Thank you for sharing that, Jenna. It sounds like you had some really awesome access right there, and then a personal chef too, right? Moms used to hook it up. No, that sounds great.
Yeah, kind of. It was a, it's so simple to make. I really recommend. It's just like salt, pepper, cucumbers, tomatoes, basil, some cheese, like olive oil, and some balsamic vinegar. It's amazing.
That sounds really good and refreshing and light too.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, thank you all so much for sharing those foraging memories. I hope you all had fun going down memory lane and hearing some of those stories from your classmates. Really, what was interesting about hearing your stories was some of the, I guess you can say, landscape components, right, that were represented in what you all shared, right? Like landscape accessibility. Some of you all mentioned the neighborhoods that you lived in and the safety component, or even just the access to green space there. It was really great to hear how some of you all were able to leave those environments and visit more open space environments that gave you more access to landscapes that you can forage in and experience this yield of fruit and harvest, right? I think that's always an interesting experience, especially when you're doing it through your traversing of community, right? With friends or family and so on and so forth, the way that we're able to build memories and community through these relationships to the landscape. Also, it was really interesting to kind of hear some of these climate considerations, really understanding the difference of climate in regards to accessibility. Jesus mentioned growing up in Guatemala and having a rainforest climate and the different of experiences that he had, climbing 30-foot trees for the mangoes and fruits that he doesn't even have access here in America anymore, right? As far as like the region and climate where things are accessible. And then also we heard from Chris as far as living in a desert climate and really some of the landscape additions folks have made to their residential places, but how he also was able to go to Sacramento, visit his family there, and see acres of land of green space access, right? And so really looking at the climate impact on what is available in our landscape for foraging. So I really appreciate all of that, right? I think also many of us build up our immune systems from eating berries off of bushes and things of that nature. And I wonder if the kids these days actually have that experience with the landscape. I think that's it's an opportunity, right, to not lose, especially as we continue to build urban spaces. How do we make sure that foraging is an experience that we can have within a landscape, an urban landscape, right? So thank you all so much again for sharing those stories. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen so we can get into today's lecture. We are gonna be doing the icebreaker, which we just completed. We'll do a reading discussion on building equity in the ever evolving urban infrastructure of water in Los Angeles. And then we'll go into the LA River revitalization case study and research analysis for the remainder of the class. We'll do some assignment overviews for our next assignment as much as we can. And then we'll go into any questions and answers that come up for like how you all have experienced the course, any questions y'all have about what's coming up. Hopefully during that time, we'll also be able to go over the October 8th field trip, which I'm really, really excited about. We have that confirmed, and I also have the other 2 field trips lined up as well. So before we get into the class discussion, do we have any questions at all about today's agenda?
Hi, will this lecture be uploaded on Canvas?
Yes, so similar to the last course, since we now have our own Zoom link, I will be recording these sessions and making them available on the Canvas for this class session. So you'll see a link on this module, hopefully within 72 hours. All right. So we'll go ahead and get into this discussion. Before we talk about before we get into the discussion for what we read and all of the good stuff, I want to do an introduction video real quick to Watershed. The reading we discussed, the reading that you all had a chance to read was really talking about the infrastructure of water management, and the socio-economic, socio-environmental, socio-political associations to that conversation. So I really wanted to introduce this video to you all to kind of ground set before we start going into the class discussion today. So with that said, let's go ahead and get into this video. It's about 10 minutes long. Take some notes because we're going to be having a quick discussion after this video. Let me know if you all can hear the video. Thumbs up if you can hear it.
I think the audio might be off.
Okay, give me 1 second.
Watersheds are the ultimate and final units for stormwater.
There we go, we could hear it.
Watersheds are the ultimate and final units for stormwater management. A watershed is an area of land that drains to one water body, such as a lake or the ocean. Everything is connected in a watershed, and what happens upstream impacts conditions downstream. When considering the watershed, we must deal with stormwater sources, transmission, and impacts. To assess the impact of land use activities on urban streams, we start by delineating the watershed boundary, identifying the stream location, and then determining the conditions of the riparian buffer zone. This process helps managers identify risks within the watershed, such as areas that could flood, shown here in yellow. When working at the watershed scale, elevation, slope, and other factors presented here should be considered. Building a Geographic Information System, or GIS, is an appropriate first step. Stream channels. The current practice is to direct urban runoff through stormwater pipes directly into streams. This creates a flashy stream flow regime, meaning higher peaks in stream flow over short amounts of time. This can result in bank erosion and increased sediment transport. Traditionally, this is mitigated by channelizing the river and straightening stream corridors. In some cases, armored banks are used, which are still prominent in many municipalities. We now know that these designs are detrimental to the aquatic biota and can lead to increased flooding problems in the lowland of the watershed. The recommended solution is to maintain a natural stream channel. This makes use of back channels, riffle, and pool systems to dissipate the energy of the water. This helps to reduce erosion caused by the stream. Large woody debris improves habitat for a wide range of aquatic organisms. Many channelized streams have been restored, but in some dense urban areas, the energy of runoff entering a stream can still cause bank erosion. Richard Bowes shows us one way to deal with this.
This is a treatment called riprap. Rain lands on an urban environment that's highly impervious. Very quickly, the rain's concentrated and put into pipes and then injected into the stream. Lots of energy, and then the energy in that water usually manifests itself in erosion of the stream banks, right? So you can see the large pieces of angular rock that are put on the banks of the stream, and that's to stop this erosion that takes place with too much rain and such high energy.
A key component to maintaining a more natural stream channel is protecting the riparian buffer zone. Riparian buffer zones are vegetated areas next to water resources that provide protection from non-point source pollution. They also provide bank stabilization and aquatic and wildlife habitat. Well-vegetated riparian buffers can also moderate water temperature, take up nutrients, and provide a noise barrier. Urban streams with a riparian buffer zone and mixed substrate have higher biodiversity than streams next to urban development. Current riparian areas regulations in the lower mainland of BC require a 30-meter wide vegetated buffer zone on both sides of a stream corridor, containing only developments that will not result in harmful alteration of fish habitat. However, research has shown that aquatic ecosystem protection is enhanced with a 60 to 100 meter buffer strip. Competing land uses on a limited land area make these wider buffer zones difficult to implement in an urban environment. Using park space, like William Griffin Park around Mosquito Creek in North Vancouver, is one way to allow for wider buffers. Good riparian buffers can be thought of as a continuous three-zone concept that addresses surface water, soil water seepage, and groundwater inflow. Also consider that watershed boundaries do not typically take groundwater into account. Allowing runoff to be detained within the buffer zone, facilitating infiltration, and having a well-developed and vegetated buffer can greatly reduce the impact of stormwater runoff. Wetlands. Wetlands that are incorporated in a riparian buffer zone can improve stream water quality by retaining sediments and allowing wetland soils and plants to take up nutrients and metals and to reduce pathogens. Riparian wetlands can occur naturally or can be constructed to store and delay urban runoff. Flooding issues. To protect low-lying urban areas from flooding, dikes, concrete structures, and other flood-proofing measures such as pump systems are often used. Strict land use zoning can prevent certain developments from being built in the floodplain, reducing the damage from flooding. This is a challenge when there is development pressure on a limited land base. Given increased climatic variability and densification of urban landscapes, additional measures need to be considered. An innovative approach to flood protection is called design flood storage. This is where we designate topographic depressions within the watershed as a place for temporary water storage during very large storms. Areas with minimal building infrastructure, such as playgrounds, parks, golf courses, and agricultural areas can effectively serve to temporarily store water that can be released after the peak storm has passed. Recently, designed flood storage has worked effectively in a number of storm events in the Mississippi River Basin in the US and in the Red River Basin in Manitoba. It is recommended that these measures become a more integral part of urban stormwater management. When used together, innovations at all three scales can be effective in restoring the system to a more natural hydrologic regime, leading to improved water quality. This has worked in the city of Surrey.
In the Campbell Heights area, we have a treatment train for water quality. The industrial land has to have 50% of its frontage drains to bioswales of some sort. Their parking areas have to all go to oil grease interceptors at the property line. The city pipe system is actually a perforated pipe to try to get infiltration as much as we can. Before it enters the creek, it goes into a mechanical device, which is a storm scepter, to clean any sediments and everything off. After the storm scepter, it then goes into, we've made like stilling basins, so it's more of a little marsh at the outlet, and then a little channel before it hits the main channel. So we've got various levels of treatment we have, so it's more of a protection because we weren't too sure how the industrial component would be. We don't know what kind of industries are going to be coming in here, and we really want to protect the creek because this creek, as we said, we've restored it and we've got a salmon run in it. So we need as much as we can for water quality.
The innovations shown in this video, restoring stream channels, maintaining riparian buffer zones, and design flood storage have the potential to significantly reduce flooding and environmental problems in urban watersheds.
More green infrastructure now, over time, is going to be less riprap, less cost to come in and do all of this engineering work, which, as you can see, is not necessarily as natural for the stream environment.
Challenges remain, both in incorporating these actions into new developments and in rehabilitating and retrofitting established urban watersheds. The stormwater management champions we have featured in our series are working to change this. Designs that mimic nature and infiltrate rainwater at the source are slowly becoming more mainstream in a number of municipalities. No single innovation is sufficient to reduce the flood risk. Not all combinations of options will work because of differences in climate, topography, geology, soils, hydrologic conditions, and spatial constraints. However, a combination of the most appropriate innovations is the best adaptation strategy to reduce flooding risks and improve the water quality in urban streams.
All right, so I hope you all enjoyed that video. I hope you all were taking notes. We'll go ahead and have a quick discussion about what we heard. Let's go ahead and have a few folks respond. Why is it important to understand stakeholders' interests and values to create alignment? Let's go to Jocelyn. And while we're waiting for Jocelyn to come off of mute, this video really talked about, you know, some of the considerations related to a watershed, the environmental impacts that a watershed has, and how different landscape considerations can be built into the environment to address some of those challenges. It also spoke about some of the constraints that exist, like climate, like unforeseen, weather events that may exceed the strength of your infrastructure. It also talked about competing interests based off of the site and the different best practices that can be implemented to address some of the challenges that come up, but how those solutions are then kind of coming up against competing interests of developers or how the current site is currently being used. So with that being said, let's go ahead and open up the questions back to why is it important to understand stakeholders' interests and values to create alignment? Jocelyn, do you want to go ahead and take a shot at that? You are still on mute. You may want to respond in the chat. So while we're figuring that out, I'll go ahead and go to Linda. Feel free to ask any clarification questions that you may have if you'd like. Third time's a charm, Edgar.
I think probably because they have it's important for them to what is it important to understand stakeholders? I think it's important for them to have an interest and understand the values of this because they have the means and the financial support to be able to take action to actually make these take this movement and make work on applying this to landscapes. Can you hear me?
Right. Yeah. No,
Yeah.
you're bringing us a good point. So really
Yeah. I think it's the
understanding,
means.
right, stakeholder interests and values allows you to speak to that in what it sounds like what you were saying is to represent that in the environment or in the landscape proposal.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Awesome. What comes to mind for you, Jesus? Why is it important to understand stakeholders? And when we're talking about stakeholders, we're talking about anyone or any entity that's impacted by the landscape. So it could be developers, it could be residents, it could be folks who want to use the landscape for recreation. So why is it important to understand stakeholders' interests to create alignment across stakeholder groups?
I think it's important because they need to understand, or it's kind of like they're catering to a specific, let's say demographics, right? And they need to make sure that within itself, they keep also that population in some type of health state as well, healthy state. Especially with water, you must make sure that this water is clean and if it's not, then you could get people really sick and whoever's exposed to this. And not just that, but also it opens up the opportunity for different environments being created, and so it could benefit different communities for sure.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jesus. Let's go to the next question. How does the environment serve as a stakeholder and communicate its needs? Let's go to Ryan.
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
So how does the environment serve as a stakeholder, and how does the environment communicate its needs?
Essentially through the deprivation of goods that the environment would provide, such as crops.
So if the environment is supposed to yield a harvest of some kind, and it, for whatever reason, is no longer producing that harvest, that is that, are you saying that that's a way that the environment communicates its needs?
Yes, if the nutrients in soil are no longer there, it can't produce anything.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's a great point, because the environment doesn't speak like, let's say, like we do, right? So how can you read an environment and see what challenges it's having, right? And come up with solutions to address those challenges. So what you said, Ryan, I think is great, because in the nutrient deficient environment, you would see a lack of yield of harvest, and that would be an indicator that there's something within that environment that needs to be addressed, so that let's say previous numbers can be reached. I mean, this also goes into when we're talking about water. There's a lot of aquatic life, right, in streams, and so in the LA River, for example, very little aquatic life is there because it's not used as in a estuary or whatever. It's not actually being used for its true purpose. So when we're talking about the history of the river, though, there used to be trout that swam the river, and so there's no more trout coming up and down the LA River. And when we're talking about this idea of an environment speaking, I think that's a great example too, Ryan, that goes alongside yours, related to like nutrient deficient soils. There's nutrient deficient water, rivers, and streams that create a deficiency of aquatic life, right? So thank you so much for sharing that, Ryan. Let's go to Vivian. how does the environment serve as a stakeholder, and how does it communicate its needs?
I think the environment serves as a stakeholder through kind of the way it expresses itself. Like, for example, in areas where there's a large algae bloom, the fish in the water will react in where they're all washed up upon shore because they're being suffocated. Like the algae is taking up so much of the oxygen in the water that they just can't survive. And we can see that that the waters aren't healthy when fish is washed up on shore like that. And what was the last part of the question?
And how does it communicate its needs?
So yeah, I think when larger natural disasters happen like that, it communicates its needs through obviously like visually and also by smell. Like when I used to like would go to like the Delta with like my family and we would see that you can already smell it from like a mile or like 2 miles away before you're even up close to the Delta.
Thank you for sharing that. So sight, smells are also a way to understand the environment's needs. Thank you so much for sharing that, Vivian. So let's go to the next question. The next question is related to why is it important to identify authority or constraints related to policy design and finances? Why is it important to identify authority or constraints related to policy, design, and finances? Let's go to Chris.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that one more time?
So the question is, why is it important to understand and identify authority or constraints related to policy, the design, and finances?
So basically you're saying like how to work around like how much money they have and how to deal with.
Yes, like these questions are being asked as a landscape architect, right? So why is it important for a landscape architect to identify authority and constraints related to the design, policy, or finances?
So basically they have to have investors to come in. So basically relying on however many investors they have is how far they can go with the site. And then still relying on like the environmental and infrastructural policies and stuff like that, and not going overboard and failing any of those would be the main goal. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Chris. That's a really great point, right? You have to have investors. And so oftentimes with a landscape architect, either you have a client who's invested in your vision, or you work for a company like or a government body who is investing in the site development. But the scope of your project should be within the confines of that investment. So your ideas should be within the scale, right, of the budget that's available to implement it. So thank you for sharing that, Chris. And you also mentioned the different environmental constraints. That's a really big part of it. We'll learn a little more about that in our case study. But thank you so much for sharing that. Let's go to Vivian. Not Vivian, I'm sorry, you shared already. Thank you so much for that. Jenna, let's go to you.
Could you keep this question on the screen by any chance? I'm gonna try.
Yeah, no problem. So the question is, why is it important to understand, identify authority and constraints related to policy, your design considerations, and what was the last one, Chris? Let me put um, the design consideration and finances, so the money.
Right, okay. Well, most of the time when it comes to like doing projects for landscape architecture, you can't do a project without like addressing the community needs and speaking directly with like city council or any kind of like government body that relates to the local project that's going on. So you have to get those, like, you have to get approval from those people. And there are like zoning issues and different policies that could really shut down your whole project if you don't follow them, or could really change the scope of your project depending on the policy. So knowing those is important, as well as like the finances you have to have. I know that there's like a really big problem with, like projects losing financing halfway through, or like one of the stakeholders feeling like they're not being represented, and so they're pulling out of the project, and that happens a lot. So having like a full grasp of how the policy affects your project, who's like the financial backing behind it, is really important, so you don't lose your project.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Jenna. All valid points. I really appreciated you talking about one, the zoning, right? Zoning is a big factor related to what can be built on site, what type of amenities it can have, how tall a building can be on a site, right? So those legislative considerations definitely need to be understood when you're building out your design. And then also you mentioned something I thought was very powerful, was the stakeholder buy-in, right? Not only do you have to get the electeds to, let's say, maybe even vote on your project, because there may be a lot of project proposals, right? You'll also have to get the community to feel like your project is going to meet its needs, right? And so thank you so much for sharing those examples, Jenna. So the last question is related to cost, right? But the cost is, how would you define a full cost analysis that is beyond economic? So with this question, I want you all to think about the cost of a project, the cost of not completing a project versus, like, let's say the benefit or the saved cost, right, of implementing a specific project based off of the long-term impact it can potentially have. So in your vision, how would you define a full cost analysis that is beyond economic? And let's go to you, Daniel, with the black hood.
I would probably define a full cost analysis as like including like in ideas of sustainability, like how much water capture you're saving off the drainage of roofs, kind of how you can calculate that throughout the year, maybe, and maybe how much you can be saving just installing like catch basins. It can also be in terms of like the planting. So what would this tree planted specifically here, like what is that going to require on top of just the installation, but also like the sprinkler system, the water amount, the gallons per year, and calculations like that, kind of seeing into the future to help kind of add any additional costs or even show like any benefits on top of just the present time of the project.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Daniel. I really appreciated the way that you framed that, right? When we were talking about what you're introducing to a site and the benefit it could have, but also the idea of, like, let's say, the cost of losing water capture. How is that impacting the local environment, especially in a region like ours who constantly are encountering challenges with drought, right? We have one of the most extreme droughts of our lifetime happening right now. Yet we have a river that we're not using or doing any intentional strategic water capture to account for some of the rainfall that does happen when it happens, right? And while that being said, I always think it's interesting to up against this drought, we also have the ever imminent possibility of flooding, which doesn't mean that, the drought is over. And so when we have these moments with extreme weather events and we have floods, all of that water is impacting our region on a flood level, but we're also not capturing that water for any use on a long term. So yeah, no, thank you for sharing that, Daniel. Let's go to Ulysses.
I would say, I guess similar to Daniel, like a full analysis, such as like maybe like an environmental impact report that can project, you know, those numbers that you want to be seeing in the future, like to try to quantify like the effects of the groundwater, you know, of a project, for example, how that would affect in the long term, not just like within like 5 years. But I guess just trying to bring in like the way I think of it is to try to bring in some sort of science to help you out, you know, to get measurable results, to not just have a project, you know, completed for nothing essentially, or for the impact to be too small in a way. But then that's also like you can argue like what is too small, but something along those guidelines.
Yes, yes. Thank you, Ulysses. I really appreciated what you brought up as far as developing an environmental impact report. That is a critical, I think, missed opportunity with most projects related to what will be the impact on the environment. A lot of times the cost is related to the profit, right? How much money can be made on a specific project, or how much tourism can be created with the specific project. But there's often a lack of consideration for the environment as a stakeholder. So I really appreciated you bringing up this idea of science, right? Making sure that there's a scientific, measurable relationship to the project, as well as this idea of developing an environmental impact report, which is a critical component that I would argue everybody with every project, every single project needs to have. And we have CEQA, right? And CEQA is supposed to, in many ways, account for that. But I think a lot of times those are afterthoughts, right? Like, let's check off the box for CEQA compliance versus having that built into the considerations of the full project scope. So thank you so much for providing that example. And I think that's a perfect segue to transition into the breakout questions, listen to some music, and have you all log onto the Canvas to respond to the lecture questions. So as we do in most of the course, well, in most of the classes we've had so far, I'll put the questions in the chat as well, but I want you all to, you know, respond to these questions and then post them on the Canvas link, right? Turn it in for your Canvas credit for today's class. The questions are, what are the infrastructure and policy changes caused by the American Movement West? And this is in response to the reading. What are present day consequences resulting from historical design decisions related to water infrastructure here in LA? What initiatives are aimed at residents to support transition to more drought tolerant landscapes? What are some agencies that manage water infrastructure? And where does the water come from that the state of California uses? So these are some questions that I want you all to respond to related to the reading. We'll do a brief conversation about this before we continue with today's lecture, but we'll take about 10 minutes to respond to these questions. Any questions before we break out?
Yeah, I have a question. Where can we find the link on Canvas for this assignment?
It should be on module 5. Module 5 should now be available. And it's the lecture, Building Inclusive and Sustainable Landscapes, Process is Product.
Okay, thank you.
start coming back now. Go ahead and give me your thumbs up if you're back with us. Give folks about another minute to wrap up their responses. All right, so folks should be wrapping things up. Let's go ahead and get those thumbs up. Or a thumbs down if you still need more time. All right, so I'm assuming that no thumbs down. Okay, I see your thumbs down, thumbs down, thumbs down. Okay, we'll give folks till let's say 2 more minutes. Let's say till 7:20. How about that? 7:20. All right, folks. Go ahead and start wrapping things up. And then keep in mind that you do have, time to complete this, if you don't get it all done right now. You'll have a little more time after the class to complete this. So we'll go ahead and have folks start sharing responses related to the reading so that we can go ahead and move on with today's lecture. Joshua. So I won't really ask you questions about, what are some of the infrastructure and policy changes caused by the American Movement West?
As a start, the zanjas that were used to irrigate the Mexican pueblo were no longer needed after the Americans gained full control of California. Afterwards, they've resorted to close water pipes to transport water while forcing Mexican Californians to pay for development and maintenance for the new water infrastructures, or otherwise they'll lose their property.
Awesome. How did you enjoy this reading, Josh? How did you like this reading, if at all? How did you experience it? Did you learn anything new?
Yeah, I mean, it gave like a lot of clear ideas too, and well, like what was the main issue since like there was like a new population coming in, and with that, and since like the majority of like newcomers took over office, that's when like they threw out with the old policies and made with the new, and it just really highlighted like so many issues that kind of makes up to this day of like why um there's poor water maintenance or like poor infrastructure maintenance in some of these areas, and that it overall it just really clarifies like the main issue with uh like why is this happening, and like how, and like some solutions that can be put into consideration for this, but overall it did really help me just to kind of clarify like what the main issue was in this reading.
Awesome. What about for you, Paige? Were there any other infrastructure policy changes that you identified other than what Joshua mentioned?
No, just that, again, like it was like very like racially targeted and, eventually, well, not eventually, but like just the inequitable distribution of water access, yeah, was targeted by or through race and, yeah.
Awesome. And for yourself, what did you like about this reading? What stood out most for you?
Well, I actually am very passionate about like water laws in California, so it was kind of cool to go deeper into the history of it. Because of like all of the water law issues that we're having like in like Central California, like in Kern County and everything. And I don't know if anyone is familiar with that, but yeah, basically like, a lot of like the agriculture industry over there, like specifically almonds, it's just like really, really terrible how like the laws haven't been like fully updated to like accommodate for the local farmers that live there, and it's like they're just keep getting bought up by like corporations, so.
Thank you for sharing that, Paige. Stephen, what are some of the present day consequences resulting from historical design decisions related to water infrastructure?
Our present day stakeholders are impacted by the poor design choices that were made in the past, and in turn impacting health and a lack of green infrastructure.
That's a really good one, Stephen. Thanks for bringing that up. Catherine, what were some of the present day consequences that resulted from historical design decisions?
I looked at how the water pipes were getting old. I guess just something different than what Steven added, just because it said it wasn't built with the best materials and they were operating a lot past their lifetime. So there were a lot of reported leaks.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. Catherine, what about you, Emilio? Anything you would add to that?
Yeah.
Impact
Well,
of
I think it does. I think I should mention the main problem, which is the leaks, because the entire system was built close to 100 years ago, and constantly, if I don't remember exactly what year, I think 2012 was report a huge amount, a huge number of pipes that got problems. They broke, and they working on it to fix that. And also another problem that I think I remember is that some areas in LA has problems with the water, because the water is not very safe to drink, and people who live in those communities, I think it also have problems because they have to drink the water. That's what I remember.
Thank you for sharing that.
I can also like add on one thing. It's also that like the system can't it can't basically clean the dirty water that comes in when it rains. And one thing I know that's like outside of the article because I'm actually studying this in my studio, is that when there's like rain, much of some beaches like are even like closed off because there's just so much discharge, like such that runoff is just detrimental because like it impacts the water system, and from there it's like a direct, contact, water pollution. And
Jocelyn, you mentioned health risks. Do you want to elaborate on that?
Yeah, from the reading, from my understanding, because of the infrastructure made back then and how it was so systemically discriminated a lot of people. Because of it, it caused a lot of contamination in the water, which doesn't only affect like the marginalized communities, but everyone else. And that causes a lot of health risks. And of course, that's not very good. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Jocelyn. I think
Can I?
oftentimes, Jesus has his hand raised. I think that's Juan that mentioned. We'll go to Jesus and then Juan next.
Yeah,
But to quickly check in with what Jocelyn was saying, I really appreciated what you uplifted, Jocelyn, because we oftentimes have experienced historical race-based design considerations that in the long term impact everybody, right? And I think what you brought up really highlighted that is that some of these considerations were intentionally made to impact a certain demographic or a certain region of the city, a certain area of the city, geographical location, but the ultimate impact affects a whole region. So this is why inclusive design is important, right? So again, I just wanted to really highlight what you said in there, Jocelyn. Thank you for bringing that up. Jesus, and then we'll go to Juan.
yeah, this was actually an interesting question, and I did want to talk about this because what I wrote is present day consequences from historical decision made are the ability for aquifers to be properly filled again through natural groundwater filtration, and by making concrete rivers and just living in a concrete jungle ourselves. Even street runoff completely kills ecosystems. Like living in a concrete jungle definitely the whole heat island effect, and when it rains, all the runoff is like boiling, and we can't do anything with that water really. It's just dirty water, but not just that, but again, it kills ecosystems, and I think we're just paying the price for that now, for living in such conditions, so.
Thank you for sharing that, Jesus. That's a great point. We're the cause of our own demise in a lot of ways, right? So yeah, let's go to Juan.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up how like with the water runoff and then it goes into the soil, and like let's say like they were gonna like they had like proposed development projects going on, like the soil is like now contaminated, so they probably had to take like a few layers of the soil off and then bring new fresh soil in. And then another example, I have an example, like in the Coachella Valley, there's this area that has like it's called the Oasis Park Homes, and they have a lot of arsenic. I think that's how you pronounce it, in their water. And these are things that they didn't know prior to moving into the area. And it's like a low income area, so like they have nowhere else to go, and they have to they get like water, and that's the only source. Like they have to get their own source of water and make it last, just due to the fact that they don't have any other water that they could use. Like the sink water isn't recommended to be used as for cooking or drinking or any of that.
No, that's a really good point. There's so many things we take for granted, right? And the water sources that we have and how they can be used. We take for granted that we could, fill up a pot and make some soup or even take a shower. And we may be taking it for granted blindly, right? There are some implications as far as our local water sources. We do have some water treatment here in LA. So that is happening, right? But there are implications as far as like how, who, and when folks have access to good water sources, and the burden of folks, right? The cost of water based off of what water sources are available. Would water be cheaper if some of those aquifers and wells were accessible to local municipalities like Compton or Watts, who have to, source other water basins for water access and pay those fees? So no, that's a really good point. Thanks for bringing that up, Juan. Let's go to the. Go ahead.
No, like let's like for like future projects, like let's say they were to go like try to grow crops in that certain area, like how good would they do, and like would they even be like recommended to eat, or would they even want to do that in the first place in that area? Just look for a different spot to go ahead and do that stuff.
That's a good point. We have that issue in South LA, right? Where the soil in South LA is just not good to grow agriculture. So not only is it polluted and impacting the quality of life and the experience, the exposure to toxins, but it also prevents folks from growing on their land, right? So most lots in LA, especially in South LA, have those polluted groundwater sources as well as polluted soil. So if you do want to grow in South LA, you have to get those above bed gardens, right? And so
Yeah,
that's
like the
cost and infrastructure needed for the most vulnerable communities, right? And so that's a good point, Juan. What then happens to your ability to grow and eat the produce that you grow, given some of the quality of soil and the implications of that, from industry? Another implication, a lot of arsenic comes from farming, right? So there's a lot of wasted manure on what you call mass agriculture, right? Mass agriculture, you have these farms that have a bunch of chickens. Chicken poop is good, right? You could sell it, it's manure, but if it's a scale that is unsellable, right? Where does that go? And a lot of times folks are disposing of that in a way that isn't compliant, right? I was watching a water documentary about the Chesapeake Bay, and there's a lot of farmers along the Chesapeake Bay. And you mentioned arsenic, Juan. A lot of arsenic is in chicken poop. So runoff from farms and mass agriculture or industries, a lot of that runoff then goes into the groundwater, goes into the soil, and then impacts the local community, right? So both in the environment, the local community in proximity, as well as the environment. So again, thank you for sharing that. Raised planters. Is that Ethan that just came off of mute? We'll go to the next question. What initiatives are aimed at residents to support the transition to a more drought-tolerant landscape? Let's go to Daniel with the black hoodie. I was gonna say the other Daniel, but I think he might have dropped off. Daniel. We'll go to Daniel, then we'll go to Vivian for this question. You may be still on mute, Daniel. Vivian.
Sorry.
Okay, go ahead.
So I was talking about, or for the question the answer was going to be the part where the EPA suggests kind of like these kind of measures that combat for sustainability, such as like rain gardens, and you can also see like these filtration and capture systems and simply drainage from structures as well, constructed wetlands, and like kind of restoring the habitat and soils of these areas through the use of biology and biologists, experts, and such. So that's what I was thinking when it asked about like what kind of countermeasures we can do to like ease into reusing the landscape.
Thank you so much for sharing those. I really wanted you all to read this article because, I wrote this a while ago, and I wrote it because there was so many different intersectional impacts of the conversation related to water access. It was the impact it had on residents, impact it had on businesses, the implication that local policy initiatives had on what actually was feasible in addressing water access or the water crisis. And so the examples that you gave are very vital, right? Because it's really speaking to how can those things, how can we introduce solutions in the landscape? And with you all being landscape architects, I thought that this article in particular was important to have you all like read, because I feel what I'm trying to get you all to understand in this course is those intersectional relevance to your landscape intervention proposals, right? And so I felt like this article in particular, maybe because I wrote it and that's how I think, right? But it has all of those components in it. And so when you're talking about those solutions, you all are going to be providing solutions to these environmental, socio, political issues. And I want you all, while you're providing those solutions, to also have an understanding of the peripheral challenges, right? That influence what type of considerations your design should have. And so when you're reading these documents, when you're watching these videos that have been curated for this course, I want you all to be envisioning what your interventions would be, how you can communicate them using research, right? And policy considerations. So thank you so much for that example, Daniel, because the article really communicates some of those landscape intervention examples, and you really did a great job with communicating that in response to this question. I'm gonna go to Ryan to respond to this question as well.
I said that the rising water costs tend to force people away from less drought tolerant landscapes. And another thing is that the popularity of succulents had a massive spike because of this. However, it was devastating for their natural population.
So that's a very great point, Ryan, because we sometimes introduce a solution that may not be what we thought it was supposed to be, right? And so succulents are really great drought-friendly introduction to a drought-friendly landscape, but it's not good for native species, and they reproduce like crazy. So they can fully take over a landscape, and that may not be the intention. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Ryan, because when we're talking about rehabilitating landscapes, you want to be considerate of native species of plants, right? One, because it prevents what Ryan is describing, this takeover of invasive species, even more drought tolerant invasive species. So really understand the compatibility of different native species, as well as the layering of your site related to keeping that that diversity in your ecosystem. Thank you for sharing that, Ryan. All right, let's go to the next question. What are some of the agencies that manage the water infrastructure? Let's go to Jenna.
I put the EPA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the U.S. Department of Urban Development. I guess you can include the WP in that too.
Yes. You mentioned some levels, right? You have some federal agencies and some local agencies in there. And both of those, I think the examples you gave are critical. And I think framing it as local agencies, state agencies, and federal agencies is a great way to think of it too, because there are different levels of authority or influence each of those agencies have for different reasons. There may be an agency that's in charge of implementation of development of infrastructure. There may be an agency like the EPA. It's really around regulation, right, and compliance, setting standards that you want to see. And so thank you for that example, Jenna. When you all are thinking of identifying agencies, you want to think about the level of agency it is, like the government level it's at, as well as the role it plays in the decision-making or compliance components. So thank you for sharing that, Jenna. Anyone else want to share? Let's go to Linda.
I also wrote down EPA and then the USDA.
Awesome, awesome. So those are big components, right? USDA is really setting regulations related to agriculture. There's clearly a better job that they can be doing, right? But really, when we're talking about your role as a landscape architect, there's ways that you can support those initiatives through your designs, right? And so you want to align your design considerations to best practices from these sources, right? And so having an understanding on like the latest framing of EPA as it relates to creating bioswales, right? Having information about that. Maybe there's funding resources related to EPA's initiatives. You want to have those things kind of spelled out and communicated so that, let's say, your client or your team understands that those considerations are aligned with some of these bigger conversations that are beyond the local conversation or beyond the state conversation. You're saying that, yeah, we got that squared away, but we're also aligned with the federal regulations communicated by USDA or the EPA. So thank y'all for sharing those. The last question, where does the water come from, right? Like, we're a big state. We have a bunch of people. I think it's what, 50 million plus people here in California. So where does the water come from that we use? Let's go to Chris.
So in the reading, it said there's two main suppliers. I don't know if it was for specifically LA or California as a whole, but it's the Metropolitan Water District and the San Gabriel Valley Water District. And these were suppliers that got their water from the Colorado River, then sold it to wholesalers, then to retailers, and then finally to the consumers, which is what kind of accumulated the finance of water and why the cost kept fluctuating so often.
Yes, thank you for breaking that down, Chris. There are more than likely more sources of water, but those were like the main ones, and really the ones that are impacting are the Los Angeles water basin or the Los Angeles region. And so the biggest thing about that is we're sourcing our water from the Colorado River, which is constantly, I don't know if you all have been watching the news, but Lake Mead is at record lows. They're finding dead bodies in Lake Mead every day because, yeah, whoever threw them in there thought that they were going to always be covered by water. This is not funny. I'm not laughing at the dead body. I'm laughing at the craziness of it. I'm one of those nervous laugh people. Raise your hand if you're a nervous laugh people. It's not like it's funny. I'm just a little nervous, right? Yep. There's a few nervous laugh people. Yeah. I'm not alone. Yeah. So with that being said, right, that's a reality that we're dealing with right now, right? And so when we're talking about sourcing water, we do have to come up with innovative ways to have local water sources and refill our local water reserves, right? And I do believe that landscape architects are going to play a major role in that, right? And so as we move on through the class today, we'll talk about some of those components. With that being said, let's go ahead and get back into the lecture. If you all need more time to complete those responses, feel free to take more time after the class. It'll be up for you all to complete. And feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about that, right?
Where do we submit this, Professor?
It's gonna be the module 5 lecture. So under the module 5, you'll see lecture discussion. You'll submit your responses to that link. It should allow you to submit it there. You all should be able to see my screen. Okay, I didn't want to do that.
Yes.
Like this. All right, so we talked about policy, right? The last conversation we had in our class, we talked a little bit about policy on wanting to really figure out like how do you communicate this, and we framed it like around design, but with policy also being a component, we really want to really communicate or identify policy implementation strategy or policy that is relevant to this work. And so this right here is a framework for policy development structure, but as I promised, I did develop one for design research strategies. So with policy, it's not too different, right? You want to work with impacted demographics, discuss and ID policy implementation strategies, develop policy implementation subcommittees for research, let's say legislative visits, policy implementation, outline development, right? And all of that work then ultimately results into your policy implementation proposal. And then you use that proposal to implement your policies. Now, this framework is a similar one, but you all may not always have the ability to do direct engagement. You may direct engage with your client. You may direct engage with your team. But a lot of your work will be research, right? And that research does exist. So for the purpose of design, I wanted to develop this framework for you all to understand how to develop design research strategies. So what you want to do is ID your site in regional design constraints and challenges, right? So design constraints, the different site considerations, how big the site can be, what zoning or policy constraints exist, what financial constraints exist. And then when we're talking about challenges, this is where we're talking about socio-political, environmental, and economic challenges. So how people relate to the political impact of site, environmental impact of site, and economic opportunity of site, right? These are currently challenges that your proposed design intervention will mitigate. It will address or speak to these challenges with considerations of these constraints. Any questions about this framework?
Is this page available for us on Canvas, or will this just be
So
available?
there's a hyperlink on the module 5 lecture on that you'll have access to this lecture. So it's there.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. And then your proposed design intervention would be the result of all of this, right? So you ID your site, you research design constraints, policy constraints, financial constraints. You make considerations of the socio-political, environmental, and economic challenges, and you develop a proposed design intervention, right? So let's go ahead and watch this case study, and then we'll spend the majority of the rest of the class like working through activity on trying to answer some of those questions. All right, so let's present. Let me know if y'all can hear it.
Let's take a look at a case study to see how all these pieces fit together. And we'll use the Los Angeles River revitalization. Previously, in the introduction, we talked about current state, vision, implementation. So let's talk about what the current state was of the Los Angeles River circa 2005. And here's a picture of the Los Angeles. For those of you who are familiar, it's a concrete lined channel that runs from the San Fernando Valley through the city of Los Angeles into the Pacific Ocean. About 31 miles of it are inside the city of Los Angeles. And the city of LA developed a master plan in the mid-2000s to guide development and revitalization of the river, which included improvements within the channel itself, where you saw the concrete from before, as well as the corridor, which is the land on either side of the river. So the vision was long range, it was very optimistic, it was mostly unconstrained, and it involved removing concrete from the channel. It involved improving water quality so that kids could frolic in it. It included adding trees on either side. It included redeveloping properties along the river in order to create access between the river and adjacent neighborhoods. So the vision of the Los Angeles river revitalization is consistent with the criteria of the vision that we discussed earlier in the city-making dialectic, which is it's long range, it's optimistic, and it's unconstrained. But there are, in fact, of course, lots of constraints to implementing that vision, both across design, policy, and finance, and across those scales we previously discussed around geography. So I'll tick off a couple of them. One of the constraints was that the Los Angeles River is a flood control channel, which, although not filled with much water most of the year, does fill up almost entirely several times a year. It moves a tremendous amount of water. There was extensive flooding in the 1930s, which caused the river to be channelized with concrete by the Army Corps. So the city and federal government have a good interest in maintaining the existing flood capacity. Okay, so that's a constraint. If you want to take out concrete, you're going to have to do hydrological studies that show that you're not exacerbating flood risk during rain events and snow melt. So that's a constraint. Another constraint would be that a lot of the land on either side of the river was designated industrial. There was a lack of access to the river from adjacent communities. So even if you did really amazing things inside the river itself, if there were barbed wire fences and industrial uses separating the channel itself from the adjacent neighborhoods, then that would prevent access and diminish the quality of the experience. Another constraint was insufficient funding to execute the vision. And then there were at the time concerns about gentrification, but that wasn't one of the main concerns at that time, although as we'll see in a second, it has become more of a concern. So some of the strategies that were determined based on that tension between the vision and the constraints were to rezone the river adjacent land through a general plan update and a specific plan, which I'll walk you through in a second. The Army Corps of Engineers worked with the state and the city to do new hydrological studies to see how the channel itself could be reconfigured in order to take out some of the concrete and achieve some of the naturalization vision that we previously looked at. There was a strategy to form and fund a river development corporation to catalyze new real estate along the river and address those concerns about there being, about making connections between adjacent neighborhoods and the river channel itself. There was an effort to coordinate new public investments in bikeways and bridges and parks, which I'll show you in a minute. And there were affordability requirements in one of the plans, the Cornfield Arroyo Seco specific plan, which had some unintended consequences that we'll talk about. So let's talk about the policy, design, and finance aspects of the River Revitalization Corporation, which are the elements of city making we've been talking about. So one of the policies was a new specific plan to guide mixed-use development. It was called the Cornfields Arroyo Seco Specific Plan, adjacent to a 52-acre park that had been recently built, which is next to the Chinatown neighborhood and the Chinatown light rail station. It was a form-based code, and it created new zones with lots of requirements for community benefits that allowed developers to build more in exchange for certain community benefits, some of which we talked about previously in our community benefit conversation. It was very, very specific about the kinds of uses that can be conducted there, as well as the form. So it was both Euclidean use-based zoning as well as some form-based zoning. And it was very, very prescriptive. The Cornfield Arroyo Seco specific plan got a lot of attention at the time because it was one of the first form-based codes in the city of Los Angeles. It was one of the first lead for neighborhood development plans in the nation. And it was a really exciting approach to city making. But it had some unintended consequences, which is basically within 5 years of its approval, not a single unit of housing had been built because despite the fact that it was next to new investments in park, next to a light rail station and adjacent to downtown Los Angeles, which is a very strong market, it was the level of specificity and constraint in that plan reduced the feasibility of new development and wasn't able to generate any activity within the first 5 years of that plan happening. So the plan, albeit ambitious, was a little bit a victim of its own aspirations in that it was so prescriptive that it reduced a lot of development. I think there's been 1 or 2 projects that have happened in the past few years, but generally speaking, there's not been a whole lot of development in this area, even though it's a very, very strong market area. But the policy and design elements of the river revitalization include a new river improvement overlay. So it's a zoning overlay along all 31 miles of the river that go through city of Los Angeles, as you can see in this image. There was a point system, so new development has to achieve a certain amount of points across these three categories of watershed, design, and mobility. So for watershed, that's things like native landscaping, daylighting, small streams that flow through the site, treating stormwater before it goes into the LA River, reducing hardscape, smart irrigation. The design options, the points you could accrue, include providing publicly accessible open space on new developments, to sort of clean up and screen or move parking away from we talked before about the role itself, along with primary green streets that were in the corridors that flow through the site, treating stormwater before it goes into the LA River, reducing hardscape, smart irrigation. The design options, the points you could accrue, include providing publicly accessible open space on new developments, to sort of clean up and screen or move parking away from the greenway, the area along the river, in order to have more active uses in that area besides just parking. And then for mobility, the city wanted developers to provide entrances from the river itself to their properties, because prior to all this, the properties saw the river as sort of their backyard, and we wanted to make that sort of a front yard. So if you're biking or walking along the river and you want to go into a cafe or neighborhood or a store, there would be access points from the river into that store. It also called for connections from the greenway into neighborhoods, and required developments to provide, or required as a point in that could be accrued into a minimum number of required points, bicycle and shared car parking. So if you're a developer, you want to build in the Rio, the river improvement overlay, you've got to accrue a certain number of points in these three categories, and you can mix and match just like you can through LEED. Another policy and design element of the Los Angeles River revitalization was standards for complete streets near the river. So river promenades that were adjacent to the river itself, along with primary green streets that were in the corridor itself, the corridor being the neighborhoods around the river. There's also some guidelines for new development. These were suggestions, not requirements, but it did begin to elevate and market and socialize the idea that development near the LA River should adhere to some elevated design principles. And then in finance, we talked before about the role of public sector as regulator and developer of public realm. I would say the city of LA has made some pretty substantial investments in public realm, as has the city of Glendale. You can see here there's some new parks with stormwater management components, which is really important given that the Los Angeles River is a flood control channel, and water from the whole city of LA eventually flows into it during rain events. So we want to capture and treat that water before it goes into the river to reduce the volume going into the river and also to improve the quality of the water. There's been a couple of new bridges. The one on the top left is a new bike pedestrian bridge crossing the river, and the one on the bottom right is a bike pedestrian equestrian bridge that connects the North Atwater community to across the LA River and under the 5 freeway to Griffith Park. There's a series of stables in the North Atwater side of the river, and now those equestrians can take their horses across the bridge and into Griffith Park, which is a really, really great project, and it's very iconic. So I think there is an important role for the public sector to play in real estate development on properties that they own. And we also talked, of course, about the role of private developers in real estate development. There has been new real estate development along the river. You can see in these images that these projects have met those river improvement overlay standards. They have landscaping along the LA River bike path. They have doors that open from their business or residence to the greenway, and they've sort of oriented themselves more towards the river. So let's take a look at how all these city-making pieces fit together in the LA River corridor. Originally, the current state of the LA River was a concrete flood channel with very few amenities and no essentially river-facing development. It was really off the radar, and the city wanted to make the LA River a focal point. The vision was a 52-mile linear park connecting the diverse neighborhoods of Los Angeles into one amenity, providing much needed open space and catalyzing new river adjacent development. Some of the constraints were that, as we mentioned, were that the area was zoned for industrial and low-rise development. The Army Corps had lots of constraints about what they would and wouldn't allow in the channel. Design-wise, there were constraints around limited access to the river from the adjacent neighborhoods. There's rail and utility lines in the river. There weren't any design standards The financial constraints were low land values at the time that discouraged investment, environmental contamination that created barriers to transactions. And what got implemented from that towards that vision and through the constraints were bike paths, new parks, new recreational amenities, design guidelines, specific plans, public realm investments like bridges, and new residential development. And all of those implementations, the future state is now the current state, which is that the city was successful in catalyzing new development in the area, and now is dealing with a new set of concerns around displacement pressures in the area, lack of affordability for low-income residents, and newcomers. So as we discussed earlier in the city-making dialectic, forward towards the vision through the constraints. So as we said before, you move forward from the current state towards your vision, and as you cycle through that, you create a new current state based on the results of your implementation efforts that then need to be dealt with. So today, there's a lot of concerns in the LA River corridor around gentrification and affordability, and a new set of strategies needs to be developed in order to address those concerns.
All right, so another video banger, right? I think that video was very informative and definitely spoke to a lot of what we've been discussing so far in this lecture. We're talking about different considerations of site. And also, I think what I really liked about this video was how, again, it broke down all of those constraints, right? The different political, financial, and design constraints. But it closed with this future impact of site, right? So after you introduce your landscape interventions, what implications in the future will your landscape interventions have, right? What new considerations will have to be made related to accessibility, related to usability, related to affordability, right? And so quality of places, sustainable mobility, social safety, and cohesion, and economic vitality. All of those things I think are relevant, right? When we're talking about site. The quality of place, sustainability and mobility of it, the social safety and the cohesion of it, as well as the economic vitality of site. All those things are relevant. I want you all to really think of the different challenges of site as well, related to the social, political, social, economic, social, environmental. We'll be doing activity in a minute, but before that, I want you all to read these definitions. I'll call on a few folks to read them out loud. Let's go to Ricardo. Can you read the first definition, socio-political?
Yeah, social political of relating to or involving a combination of social and political factors like religion, civil rights, and land taxes.
Awesome. Paige, can you read socioeconomic?
Socioeconomic status is the social standing or class of an individual or group that is often measured as a combination of education, income, and occupation. Examinations of socioeconomic status often reveal inequities in access to resources, plus issues related to privilege, power, and control.
Awesome. And then the last one, can I have Vivian or Giselle? Can I have you read it, Giselle, for me?
Socio-environmental, how we behave, our relationships, our gender and ethnic group, our education and work, the conditions and communities in which we live, and how we feel about ourselves are all elements of the social environment.
Awesome. So when we're talking about these considerations related to our projects, we want to identify the different challenges that exist in proximity of the site that we are, introducing a landscape intervention to understand some of the challenges related to these components. These things then help us conduct our research. It helps us identify research materials created by target stakeholder groups, develop short narratives of site background, identify design intervention opportunities, as well as identify design precedent. Okay, so what I want us to do now is do some skill practicing using the legislative canvas as a frame, but also using an adaptive tool. Give me 1 second while I grab that link. Stop sharing. Then we're gonna go here. I'm gonna break us out into groups, right? It's gonna be 3 groups. Each of you will identify socio, environmental, political, or economic components of the LA River project case study and complete this tool, okay? So what I'm gonna do is drop the link to the tool in the chat. And what you all will do in your groups, you will have the topic social, environmental, political, or economic, and you'll identify design, policy, finance components related to these 3 focus areas. So that's this. All right, so what I'm gonna do is put it in the chat, boom. So your groups are identified. So again, you'll take, let me share my screen. So you all should be able to see my screen right now. So based off of this project, the River Revitalization Project, you'll be able to review the video, but I also have some other cool links for you. Here are some documents that there's some it's the revitalization, the LA River Master Plan. So you can use that to think through this activity as well. So before I break you out into your respective groups, are there any questions about the activity? All right, so you all want to work collaboratively. The goal is for each of your groups to complete the questions, responses, right? What are first you want to identify your socio-environmental constraint, right? So you want to put that in the first box of the identify social constraint. So you want to put that there, identify that as a group. Then you want to identify the design constraint related to that, policy constraint related to that, financial constraint related to that. As indicated by the video and or the document that was shared with you. You also want to identify community vision. If there are any state references, like in stakeholders at the state level. For example, the video mentioned the Army Corps of Engineers. That's at the federal level. So you can put an asterisk, federal level, Army Corps of Engineers. You know, that could be related to their jurisdiction. Policy constraint, that could be a policy constraint, so on and so forth, right? So you want to use the document that was shared to you and or the video to respond to these questions. All right. So what I'm going to do now is break you out into your groups. They've been titled, so you'll see what your focus is related to the social constraint that you'll focus on. And I'll open up the rooms and I'll visit each of the rooms to just hear how the conversations are going. All right, so we'll spend 20 minutes. We'll come back around 8:30 for that after this. All right, cool. Oh, shit. I totally forgot to change the time. So we'll probably add more time. I forgot to change the time. How much? I forgot to change the time. So I am going to do that. My bad. I don't know how much time you all have. So I'm gonna, how do I change the time? Options.
So are these like anonymous zoo animals, like us, like each of us, like anonymous giraffe, penguin? Is that like everyone that has access to this PowerPoint? I mean, not PowerPoint, it's like Outlook.
Yeah, so I guess however you all are registered on Google, it has identified that way. So if you're anonymous, it'll just say that you're anonymous and then they'll do it. So we'll do 15 minutes in the breakout for this activity. And then we'll come back to the main room. All right.
Okay.
Cool. Sorry about that, y'all. And we're opening those rooms back.
Professor, I had a question. Where are we able to see the slides again? I think I missed when you were explaining
I'll
that.
put the link in the chat. I think everyone should have access to it, but it's also on the module 5. It's linked there.
Okay, thank you.
No problem.
need to do.
How's it going on this section? Any questions coming up?
I just guess my question was like, is there a specific site that we have, or is this like just us addressing
This is for LA
Secret-
River.
I could it cut off.
It's for the LA River case study.
Oh, okay.
So you have the video that we just watched, as
Right.
well as the document that I shared with you in the chat. That is the LA River Master Plan.
Oh, okay, I got you. I see those now.
And so your group is to identify socioeconomic constraints and then how that is represented in design constraints, policy constraints, financial constraints. And then the socioeconomic community vision, state goals, city goals, site challenges.
So like for like let's say like state goals or like city county goals, like would like I would like budgeting fit in into those categories?
Yes.
Okay.
Like, for example, there's state funding identified. There's a state or federal stakeholder identified, right? Like the video talked about the Army Corps of Engineers. That's not state, right? But you can asterisk and say federal stakeholder, Army Corps of Engineers. Or even put, I can even add another column, but yeah. But like, yeah, you would just put that information related to socioeconomic. So the video talked about housing affordability, for example, right? It also talked about the land value, right? So those socioeconomic components related to site, I want you all to talk about that.
Okay, that clears things up.
And then it's collaborative. So you all can talk to each other, you know, share ideas that's coming up for you related to what you're seeing or what you heard from the video. And that may help you all get, you know, get some ideas going.
All right, thank you.
No problem. I'll check on you all shortly. How's it going? How's it going? Any questions coming up for anybody?
Yeah, we're kind of confused about state goals. I guess yeah, that's all. That's it.
Yeah, so there may be a state legislation or state stakeholders that I brought up. I believe in the video they talked about a federal stakeholder like the Bureau, the Army Corps of Engineers, and how the river is their jurisdiction, like they own it, right? So that you can asterisk that and put, you know, Army Corps of Engineers is like managing, because the reason why they are stakeholders because they were brought in to address the way that the river used to flood all the time, right? And it would kill people and stuff. So the Army Corps of Engineers came in to build the hard bottom river. And so now they manage it because the regional government weren't able to do it at that time, right? And so now they have a goal to, right, keep it as a flood channel. That's their role in the conversation. So their goal is to keep it as a flood channel, working flood channel. That's an example, right? So you're thinking of the goals related to the stakeholder as a state, federal, or county, city, county, right? I really wanted this class to focus on the city, county, state, because a lot of times the state and county influence each other, if that makes sense. But in this case study, we also have a federal, right? So you can put that there as another, you can put that as state. Let's put slash federal. That away if it's state, federal, city, county. Does that help?
Yeah, I think so. So you said
Yeah.
like as an asterisk to I mean as why the Army Corps of Engineers
Like their goal, because I mean I
their
was meaning asterisk, like, you know, because federal wasn't
yeah,
mentioned, but now I just put slash federal, so you can add them as a goal stakeholder, right?
I
The
see.
federal government has a goal to keep it as a flood channel and prevent the catastrophic flood events.
Okay.
Awesome. So I'll give y'all a couple of more minutes on that and I'll check back in on y'all shortly.
Addressing like marginalized communities, maybe. I mean, maybe that would go into policy, financial, or community vision too, but
Yeah, that would look good in.
I really love that y'all are having a conversation, so I'm gonna let y'all continue y'all conversation. I'm gonna go work with the other groups. Keep it going, keep it going.
So thank you.
Mm,
Feel free to converse with each other too, right? That sometimes, you know, gets ideas going. So I'm gonna go ahead and assign, if you don't mind, Jesus, if you can facilitate conversations around this, just like try to get, yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So I know we're typing in right now, Army Corps and Engineers.
All right, so let's see if I can extend the time. Oh, okay. All right, so how's it going over here? Feel free to again to converse. I wanna, Juan, if I can choose you to kind of facilitate a bit of the discussion. I think we got about a minute left.
Yeah, so right now, for city and county goals, I just noted out that like for socioeconomical, like bringing in more jobs to the community, making sure that there's ways so that the communities have like could get funding and stuff like that. And then for side challenges, I added in to make sure that it's affordable. And so I think someone else wrote down that finding sources for funds. So that's kind of what we got going on right now for policy constraints, develop an infrastructure, investment strategy.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Well, I hope you all enjoyed that activity. We'll go ahead and do a quick share out from each group. It's okay if you haven't completed all of your responses, but I do want you all to kind of give some responses of kind of where you're at, how that felt, how the experience was watching the video, and then doing this activity exercise with trying to identify some of these components. So let's go to the socio-environmental group. Who wants to volunteer to share what their group discussed?
I could share out what we were talking, and if anyone feels like adding in, please do so. So honestly, it was a little bit difficult to, you know, come up with a lot of these for us. But so for design constraints, we talked about addressing public health. For example, like, you know, ADA compliance within the design that has to happen, and that addresses, like, you know, the local community. For policy constraints, we talked about the zoning and sort of how it might be difficult because it is a lot of the land along the river is industrially zoned, and how that connection with the local community would sort of look like, you know, how they would feel about going into the space with the local surroundings. Some financial constraints would be the stakeholder input into the project and the developer incentive for the project. So how the local community, so it'd be like schools, churches, residences, how they basically approve of the project in order for you know, for the funding to be there, essentially for the developers to see this want or need for development. And for community vision, we talked about I believe Paige referenced the article that we read about, you know, how a lot of marginalized groups were affected in the past, such as the Chinese and Mexican groups. So We want to make sure that it's an accessible landscape for all and also addressing the marginalized communities. So this might look like, a sort of, not a memorial, but, maybe educational placards about, the past issues with water maintenance and that whole history. And then for state or federal goals, a system-wide quality control of the water in the river and better management practice. And for the city and county goals, consistency for pricing and quality of water that comes with the project, improvement to the local, basically water system in the city. And then challenges, of course, would be the development efficiency within the city, bringing in drought tolerant plants or landscaping. Did you want to add something, Joshua?
Oh yeah, because I just want to add that with limited access to Greenway, because in respect to how the LA River is being used and how it's currently still being used into flood control, for flood control. It's just like the materials that they had to work with though would possibly add some constraints on what can they work with, but possibly they would still have to keep the LA River infrastructure sturdy and stable with the existing materials, or possibly kind of refurbishing a bit, but there just has to be I don't know, there's some kind of balance between the greenscapes and hardscapes there. But mostly for sure, I mean, I think there had to be minimal green space just in a way to kind of keep this just keep this river or just this infrastructure sturdy and stable, to keep just to prevent any severe flood damages.
No, that's a big factor, right? Like you're mitigating a couple of components, right? It being used as flood channel, but also figuring out how to create less hard bottom parts of the river and more access points without decreasing its infrastructure capacity to serve as what it's meant for. No, that's a big point. Let's go to socio-political. Who wants to go ahead and volunteer for that group to quickly go over high level? Yeah.
Hello.
Go ahead, Jenna.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry, I wasn't sure if you can hear me. So for design constraints, we talked about the approval from the community. Like if your design is not, they don't like your design, then you can't really do it because it's gonna not serve the community and it's gonna be out of place. And whether or not they like your design kind of depends on the political landscape that you're in. Some places like the context of it has to make sense. And then for policy constraints, I think we didn't mention it before, but zoning is a political thing. And then for financial constraints, kind of similar to the environmental group, we talked about stakeholders alignment with the project. If the stakeholders don't agree with the effects of the project, the budget, what it says politically, anything, they're not going to back it financially. So that could be a constraint for sure on your design. And then if anyone wants to take over for the last couple of ones, that's cool.
Jesus.
Yes, some other ones, we talked about the community vision was natural history, basic formation, and river hydrology. This is something that obviously the community definitely within their, the river, incorporated into the river, but still keep in mind, the constraints that, may come with this. Also, the state federal goals were from the Army Corps of Engineers flood, which were flood management and challenging the stormwater to the ocean. That was mainly, again, that was their main goal. And it does serve the purpose, but it's still, it doesn't, it's not serving or it's not catering to the current community in some sense. So in that sense, it was sort of a fail, in my opinion. Now, city county goals are to serve the community equally. And finally, our site challenges. We were pretty much wondering who had the jurisdiction over the site and who owns it, as well as the existing condition and access to the site. Those may be like some of the site challenges that designers may encounter in these, especially in such vast scale of a project. You know, it won't be it may not be accessible everywhere throughout the whole span of the river, and so yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. Those are some really great examples. Let's go to socioeconomic. Carmelio, if you could start us off.
Yes, the socioeconomic, I think that's the most difficult, because we talk about the entire project will be involve money. And most of the time that would be a problem, because if if we had two groups, like the community and the county, for example, want to do something, the community will definitely agree, or I don't, yeah, sometimes disagree because the cost would be maybe not affordable. And the policy of constraints develop an infrastructure investment strategy to support the population and the employment growth areas. Yeah, it's the same problem. Um, whatever a community wants to do, everything has to be an agreement. Cannot we can't do anything without any information or what we're going to do or what is the plan to do. In financial constraint, well, probably here is where the money is become the most important. And community vision address potential adverse impacts to housing affordability and homelessness. Yeah, many cases, a lot of people would agree and disagree. So, but I know that for homelessness, sometimes it can be difficult to deal with. It's an issue that almost nobody wants to deal with. And it's sometimes can be very difficult to convince anybody or a community what to do in this case. I don't know if somebody wants to do the last two.
Linda, if you could jump in there.
Yeah, so for our city and county goals, we put bringing in more job opportunities to the communities. And then for the site challenges concerning the socioeconomic, we put making sure it is affordable and finding sources for funds.
Well, this activity may have been difficult, but you all did a great job with just thinking through it, right? Especially the first time you all have engaged with this specific framework to understanding, like, let's say the case study of the assignment, as well as the LA River revitalization project. I did make a change to the socioeconomic responses. I added zoning to the policy component, and I moved over your develop an infrastructure investment strategy to support populations and employment growth areas to the financial constraints, right? Because I feel like that fits better in that box. And then zoning is still a socioeconomic impact, right? It impacts what type of development can go, what type of investments go. They mentioned some of the land value as well as the toxic land, like toxic soil, right? And that being the challenge to create investments and buy-in from different stakeholders related to that. So I made that update, but kudos to you all for walking through this assignment and getting some responses in here. I want you all to think about your sites in this way, right? Like, what are the design constraints, policy constraints, financial constraints that you want to consider, and communicate that in your proposals, right? When you complete a full proposal for, let's say, a landscape intervention, you want to be able to communicate some of these components. So thank you all for walking through that. What we'll do for the rest of the class is I want to go ahead and overview the next assignment. We have some pending information that I need to get for that assignment, so be on the lookout for that, but I did want to go over it with you. We will be reading Landscape Architecture Frontiers, prototyping, prototype study in landscape architecture. So you're really going to be learning how to prototype site, right? And so that book is a really great book, and it's written by an awesome author. We'll be watching a video of his. Let me see. But yeah, there's also going to be some listen tos. I want you all to listen to, on average, it's a 99% Invincible podcast series. It's a really great episode about the way we've developed and designed the world around us using this average, right? This concept of averages. So listen to that podcast. Also a podcast that I wrote. So the article that y'all read last time about water management, there's also a podcast about that if y'all ever feel the need to listen to it as well. But instead of reading the next article, I'm going to have you listen to the podcast. I hate the way that I sound. Hopefully y'all don't hate it as much. But Like an Invasive Species is a podcast that I wrote that talks about fire management. And it kind of follows the same thematic structure as the last article. Again, a great way to think through some of the climate, environmental, regional challenges that exist and think through them through landscape interventions, right? And so you'll listen to Like an Invasive Species, as well as read the assigned reading, right? I don't have my own copy of the book, so I don't know what the table of contents looks like to provide you what your assignments are. So my book should be here any day now. Does anyone have a copy of the book already? Raise your hand. Prototyping site. Yay, somebody has it. If you can send me a copy of the table of contents, I would greatly appreciate that. Please email it to me at your earliest convenience so I can get those assigned readings out. But until you get those, just go ahead and listen to the other listen tos. With that being said, that concludes the lecture portion, but I did want to open the conversation up for any questions. Definitely would love to get y'all thoughts and feedback on the class so far. You've been with me for about 5 weeks now. We've talked about a lot of things. You can come off a mute or give a thumbs up. How are y'all liking the course so far? Are you enjoying it? Are you learning? Are you feeling like you're getting insight on things that are going to help you become better landscape architects? I see some thumbs up. I see some thumbs up. Cool deal. Feedback is great, you know. Definitely open to any feedback. If y'all have any issues accessing the content, that's another thing. If you know, regards to the information, I'm trying to make information available for you all. I'm trying to make it convenient for you all to do the assignments while making the lectures available to you. So if you have any issues with doing any of the assignments, let me know. If you have any issues with understanding of the assignments, let me know. Reach out to me an email. I can meet with you. We can do a one-on-one. We have office hours, all of those things, right? But yeah, this has been great for me so far. I want to thank you all so much for being on this journey with me. I've learned a lot from you all, so I thank you all for that. And I'm excited for what we will continue to learn with each other. With that being said, the class is over for tonight. I'll go ahead and stop recording so that you all can do your question and answers that you may have regards to any issues, concerns, or questions that you have. So I'm gonna stop recording.